John chapter 13.
Come on, Willie.
Today we are going to look a little bit at the life of John the Apostle. And I feel like I can relate to John in a lot of ways. And so this message has a personal significance in my life, and hopefully it will help you guys as well. A few weeks back, about 3 weeks ago, I preached a message called A Journey to Faith. We read in Matthew 13, Jesus had gone to a town and said he couldn't do very many miracles there because of their lack of faith. And we kind of looked through, over his 3-year span of his ministry, how he spent that time trying to develop the 12 into faithful men, because they were going to need to continue his work. And in order to do that, they had to be men that believed nothing was impossible. He put them in situations that forced them to be faithful. Today is going to be part 2 of that lesson.
Okay.
And, I think there was another quality that Jesus was trying to instill in these disciples, not just to be faithful men, but to be loving men. 1 Corinthians 13 says, if I have faith, I can move mountains, but I don't love, I'm nothing. So my lesson today is titled, A Journey to Love. Now, I believe that love is frequently shown through serving. You serve those that you love. Loving people serve. So a lot of the passages we're going to look at today have to do with serving.
Okay.
And we're going to use a very similar method. We're going to go through a few different passages from the Gospels, and we're going to look at these situations that Jesus used to teach his disciples in order to help develop them into loving men. But this time we're going to focus mostly on John. We're going to get to know John pretty well today.
All right.
So turn over to John chapter 13, and we'll start in verse 1. It was before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress. The devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And I got 2 questions for us before we really dive into this message. Question number 1, why did Jesus wash his disciples' feet? And question number 2, why was John the only one to record it? So these questions are going to get answered by the end of our time. But it's interesting, by the end of his life, John the Apostle, he was known as the Apostle of Love. His theology, the way that he taught God was through love. You look at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, all about loving. The Apostle of Love. And toward the end of his life, John had it pretty rough. He was in pretty rough shape. And this is actually when he wrote the Gospel of John, was toward the end of his life. He was the last apostle remaining. So that means he had seen all the other apostles murdered, including his brother. He had been beaten, imprisoned. It's believed that he was boiled and then exiled to the island of Patmos by Domitian. He's in rough shape. It said that every day, John's disciples, they'd come to his home, they'd pick him up, and they'd carry him to where the people were so they could hear him teach. And every day, he would teach the same thing. Say, little children, love one another. And after a time, those that heard him and his disciples would ask him, Master, why do you teach the same thing? Why do you always say this? John replied, it's the Lord's command, and if this alone would be done, then it would be enough.
Amen.
the apostle of love. But what's interesting, he did not start out as being known as the apostle of love. He was actually known as a son of thunder. Now, I don't know about you, when I think of something loving, I don't think about thunder, right? When I think about thunder, I think about loud and scary. That's what John was first known as. And so we're going to look through some passages and get to know John a little bit better, get to know his character, get to know who he was, see how Jesus transformed him from a son of thunder to the apostle of love. Turn over to Matthew chapter 4, and we're going to dive right on in. Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18, says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. These dudes up and left their dad in the middle of work. Sorry, Dad. I'm out of here. I got dreams too big for this fishing boat. And here's something that you've got to understand about John that's going to continue to unfold. John was extremely ambitious. Extremely ambitious. And I think that that's why Jesus chose him. I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus picked John. I think there was nothing that John would not sacrifice. Nothing. Turn over to Mark chapter 9. It says they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, this is Jesus, hey, what were you guys discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way, they were arguing with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12. He said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. So they're walking to this town, and they're arguing about who's the greatest. You can kind of just see these guys arguing. I don't know how it went, but they get to this place, and clearly they had kept it from Jesus. They were very intentional about keeping this from Jesus. So I don't know if they were like whisper arguing, or if they were just keeping their distance, or what was going on. Okay? But Jesus asked them, can you imagine what it would be like if your discipler could read your mind? Knew what you were thinking. You know, I can just see Jesus there. Hey, so what were you guys talking about? What were you talking about on the road back there? And it just says they were silent. They didn't say anything. They didn't say what they were talking about. They didn't make up a lie. They didn't try to we were talking about how we can be great for you. Or anything. They didn't say any of that. They didn't say anything. It said Jesus calls them over. He says, guys, I know you want to be great for God. But in order to be great, you've got to be a servant. I love how Jesus handles the disciples here. You see, he doesn't rebuke the ambition away. Ambition is not a bad thing. In fact, I think as disciples, I think we need to be more ambitious for God. You don't ever see God rebuke the ambition out of John or the other disciples. What he does is he tries to channel that into the right direction. You want to be great for God, you know what? You're going to be great for God. But the way to get there is to serve. Turn over to Mark chapter 10. It's one chapter over. Then, this is another account, another situation. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. They were ambitious and very bold. Okay, I'll play along. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. We want to sit at your right and left. This is for your glory, Jesus. For your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said, you really want to be as high up as I am? Are you willing and able to go through what I'm going to go through? Yes. Anything that you can do, Jesus, we can do as well. Jesus said to him, yeah, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those whom they have been prepared. When the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who regard as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great must be your servant. Whoever wants to become first must be slave of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark clearly had some beef here with John and his brother. Okay? He writes 16 chapters, and he spends 2 of them telling the rest of humanity how competitive and arrogant that John and his brother were. Right? 2 counts back to back. This is where I think we can start to see a little bit of that ugliness and competitiveness and selfish ambition coming out in John and his brother. Hey, Jesus, remember when you said that you want us to be faithful and ask for anything we wanted and it'll be done in faith? We want you to do whatever we ask you. Okay? I think Jesus was probably excited. Look at these guys. Getting kind of bold here. What do you want? We want to sit at your right and your left. We want to be the second and third highest over all creation for all eternity. And whatever it takes to get there, we're willing to do it. Whatever sacrifice, whatever you have to do to get that high, we'll do it too. Jesus says, you know what? I know you guys are willing to sacrifice. John, you are so willing to sacrifice anything. Even your old father sitting in a boat, you'll leave everything behind. I really believe that. But I can't give you this. There's another account that said they brought their mom and got her to get on her knees and beg Jesus for this. No way Jesus is going to say no to my mom. There's no way. Mom, come over here. Look how ambitious John was. Look at this. The other guys were ticked. It says they were indignant. They were angered. They get over here. You said what? I thought I was supposed to be the greatest. Jesus called me first. Arguing. And Jesus, once again, very patiently. Guys, again, I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. I want you to do great things for God as well. But the way to get there is to be a servant. Even me, I'm the Lord of all, and I didn't come to be served. I came to lay down my life for others. That's the way to be great. Amen. We're going to continue looking here, and John's ambition is going to get pretty ugly. Turn over to Luke chapter 9. Master, said John. We're going to start at verse 51. Luke 9:51. Master, we saw someone driving out demons in your name. And we tried to stop him because he is not one of us. Don't stop him, Jesus said. For whoever is not against you is for you. Now, I've heard people use this scripture to argue that, well, we don't need to be, our church isn't the only church. We don't need to be exclusive about that. If someone's trying their best to preach the right thing, we just need to leave them alone. And you know what? That's not what's going on here. In order to understand the context of this passage, you've got to understand who John is. You see, this guy wasn't some Christian, teaching maybe a little false teaching, and John's trying to correct him. This guy was a threat to John. Jesus, we saw this other guy. He's not one of the 12. You didn't call him. We saw this other guy trying to do your work, and so we tried to stop him. Hey, quit it. Only me, my brother, and the other 10, we were commissioned by Jesus and given authority to do all this stuff. So I don't know what you're doing, but you need to cut it out. John was so competitive, he starts to get exclusive. He was so consumed with being the best, so consumed with being the greatest, that he didn't want anyone else stepping on his territory. Once again, very patiently. Isn't it so great how patient Jesus is? So patiently, hey, he's not your enemy. He's trying to do my work as well. Relax. Let's read on. Let's read in Luke 9. We're going to continue on. As time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked the Lord, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven and destroy them? But Jesus turned and rebuked them. John had finally crossed the line. He was so self-righteous, so intense, he was willing to take the life of another person. You see, we kind of chuckle at this, oh man, they're so intense, the sons of thunder. I mean, they were at the point where Jesus, if you want us to, we'll call down fire and kill all these people who aren't willing to follow. That's how intense they were. Jesus rebuked them. They crossed that line. Shut your mouth. I've been patient with you guys. John, you're so willing to sacrifice anything. The problem is you'll even sacrifice another person. That's too far. Jesus rebuked Peter, the Pharisees, evil demons, and the sons of thunder. This is John's character. Selfishly ambitious, competitive, argumentative, exclusive, impatient, violent, and merciless. This is the apostle of love. You know, I remember when I first started interning for the church, I was all about truth and not very much about grace, right? We know Jesus is full of both. This is why I think I can relate to John. There was a brother, he'd been in sin for a long time, been hiding it. He got with me because some of his sin was against me specifically in certain ways. He sits down and he works up enough courage to just share all this stuff. And it was pretty ugly. And he was just like, so man, that's all of it, what are you thinking? And I responded with, I want to punch you in the face right now. That's that ugly. I was so fired up about the truth and what was right that, man, that really hurt that guy. Yeah, he sinned against me, but man, he worked up a lot of courage to get open. He was trying to deal with it. He was trying to work through it and get resolved. And that's how I responded. And I think there's some similar qualities that I share with John. You see, ambition's not bad, but you know, at the expense of other people, when there's no sensitivity, when there's no love behind it, it is bad. Yeah. And that's what Jesus, through this process, through these 3 years, he's trying to get these guys to be so faithful that they will do anything and believe anything's possible for God. But at the same time, he needed them to be willing to lay down their life and serve and love other people. Mm-hmm. And so you can see this struggle with John. And now we get to John 13, where we started. John 13, starting in verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress. The devil had already prompted Judas. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. He got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around them. So we get to those two questions. Number one, why did Jesus wash his disciples' feet? Most would answer, which I would agree, he was trying to set an example of serving to his disciples. There's much more to it, though. I think that that's a correct answer, but I don't think it's the most correct answer. Why did Jesus wash his disciples' feet? I think the answer is because none of them did it. Picture this. He's been spending all this time trying to get these guys to serve, to love, to stop being so stinking caught up in being great. You're not serving each other. That's the way to do it. You have to serve. You're going to have to become the least. They get in there, and I picture Jesus walking in this room, kind of trailing behind. There wasn't a servant there to wash their feet. Maybe that was just an accident. Maybe Jesus had personally requested for there not to be. I don't know. But he walks in. I think he's just waiting. Anybody going to do it? Okay, they sit down to eat. They're sitting there. He's waiting. Nobody? And it says the meal was in progress. So Jesus got up. I think Jesus stood up from the meal, probably a little disappointed. He's about to die. These guys have to become servants. Starts washing their feet. The second question, why was John the only person to record it? This is just my personal perspective and thoughts. I think that this is the moment that it clicked for John. I think Jesus over and over had been teaching him to love people, to serve people, to lower himself. They're sitting at this meal, and then they see Jesus get up and start doing the lowliest task he possibly could. And I think he was like, dang, I missed that opportunity. That's what Jesus is talking about right there. I think this is when John got it. I think this is when that process started to transform and change from that son of thunder to that apostle of love. Now, guys, for us, what's the application here? We've got to be faithful men and women. We've got to be so faithful that we will do anything for God. We believe anything can happen. We'll sacrifice anything and everything. We'll leave our pops in the middle of the boat, in the middle of the water, while he said, you can finish up the work, Dad. I got to go follow Jesus. I got to do this. We've got to have that kind of tenacity and that ambition to do great things for God. But it has to be partnered with the way to get there is by lowering ourselves and serving everyone, loving everyone. Amen. You can't have one without the other. Now, this story to me is so applicable. One, man, we see God used a bunch of messed up people to carry on his work. That should give us hope. Amen. I mean, think about it. The guy he chose was willing to kill other people. Think about that. They were constantly arguing with each other about who's going to be the greatest. These guys were no different from you or me. That should give us hope. Number two, for those of us in a leadership position, or maybe you're in a position where you're working with someone, you see how patient Jesus was with these guys. We've got to have the patience to not just get so angry, but to pull people aside and teach, and be patient with them, and work with them to get to a different place. And number three, we've got to be people who serve. Amen. Now, here's the deal. I don't think many people just sit there. I hate serving, and I'm just not going to serve. You know what? There's an opportunity over there to serve. Forget that. I hate it. Most of us aren't there, and I don't think that's where the disciples were. I don't think they walked into this room like, forget you, Peter. I see your nasty feet. I'm not serving you. I don't think they have this like, serving stinks. I'm not whatever. No, they had all heard Jesus teach them over and over and over again how important it was to serve. All of us are the same. We hear how important it is to serve and how Jesus served, and we hear that all the time. The problem is, some of us, it's not important enough in our minds that we're just not consciously looking to serve. We can be so caught up in other stuff, whatever it is. It could be work. It could be your family. It could be your own personal ambition. It could be maybe you're just so insecure that all the time you just live in this world of just me. How are people going to look at me? How am I coming in? I don't know what it is, but we've got to train our minds to be active in looking for ways to serve. That's what Jesus did. He walked around from town to town. How can I heal this city? How can I serve these people? That's the kind of minds we have to have. Amen. Not just people who are willing to serve if we get asked. People who are so ready to serve and people who prioritize serving so much that we are actively, intentionally looking for ways to serve. I think we have extremely serving hearts in the church. I mean, this church, don't get me wrong, I think that's our strength. But to take it to that next level, we've got to become people that don't just serve when we're asked to be served. We look out and search out ways we can serve one another and the people in the community. That's what Jesus was trying to get with his disciples. He didn't ask them, hey, could one of you wash our feet? Oh man, I bet you'd have 5 or 6 of them. Oh, I got you, Jesus. He was trying to get these guys to have serving on their mind constantly and not have to be asked. Right. That's the application here. We've got to be men and women that are going to step out on faith and do whatever it takes and believe anything is possible. At the same time, we've got to be men and women that are constantly seeking out ways that we can serve and love other people. Amen. I think, guys, when we do that, I think that we'll be the people, the church, that Jesus needs us to be to continue on his work. Right. It's balance. We've got to have faith and love. Yeah. And thank goodness that God is patient with us, right? Amen? Yeah. Now, here's the deal. If you're fired up about this lesson, come on, Willie, preach it. You probably should go back to my lesson on faith and review those notes and get yourself to be fired up about that lesson. If you're fired up, let's be faithful, let's go do whatever it takes, you probably need to really take some time and review the notes for this lesson. Because that's sometimes how it works, okay? Now the goal is to be fired up about both, but our tendency is to usually lean toward one way or the other. I can be raw fired up about stepping out on faith all day, but man, this is what I need. And so I want to challenge us as a church to become men and women that are faithful and men and women that will serve and love people till the end, no matter who it is. Amen. Man, if we have both of those qualities equally, no telling what God can do. And so I think it's going to be encouraging to see how God grows us as we all continue on our journey of faith and our journey to love. I'm going to say a prayer and then we'll have some announcements and a closing song. God, thank you so much for your word. God, thank you just for the opportunity to learn from stories. God, I pray that you would help all of us just to be men and women who serve. I pray that you would give us the strength to continue to be men and women who serve. God, I pray for the church. God, that we would be known for our faith and for our love. God, that we would give up anything, go anywhere, do whatever it takes, be faithful, believe that anything is possible. And God, I pray that we be men and women that are actively seeking to serve the people within this church, the people in the community, our enemies, our families, people we get along with, people we don't get along with. Just pray that we can be loving, serving people. God, I know that you're growing us. I thank you for how patient you are with us. And thank you for just taking us on this journey. God, we love you very much. And it is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Amen.